Otherwise, I will pass over to you, Jeremy. Thank you very much.
Super. Thanks so much, Adrian, and thanks for for being here, especially at this time of year. I really appreciate that at this time of the semester there is an awful lot else that's going on. I'm certainly in the midst of putting the final touches to teaching for the semester. I've got all the formatives in, thinking about what's coming next, the Christmas break, and everything like that. So it's really, really lovely to have you here and to have the chance to talk about assessment optionality with you. This will be a bit of a meandering talk. I hope that's okay. In part, what I'm going to talk about is a research project, a piece of research that I undertook a couple of years or a year and a half ago now, a staff student partnership project to explore the viability or the potential of employing assessment optionality, i.e., giving students some choice in how they're assessed in political science or political studies, as we might call it in the UK, and in the context of this PSA webinar. And then I'm also going to talk about my process that I did after the research of one, publishing the results of the research. As Adrian kindly mentioned at the beginning, I'm interested in these two strands of research, one of which is very much focused on the scholarship of teaching and learning, and I'm very pro the dissemination of the work that we're doing. So I'm going to share a bit about that, and I'm also going to share some of my own experiences employing assessment optionality. And then, as Adrian said, yeah, we've got some time for questions. And I also thought if we're feeling keen, we want to at the end, maybe we could even workshop some ideas around how this may play out. If at any point people do have questions, feel free to use the chat function or interrupt me. Maybe if I'm really you can tell that I'm in a great flow, use the chat, but otherwise you can interrupt. That's absolutely fine, of course. I'm joking. I don't think I can get into a great flow in week 10. So anyway, um, this is it. Giving choice a chance. I don't know why this title stuck in my head the way it has. But I'm very thankful to the TLN that I got to share this at this time with this title at long last. So, in a way, I'd like to, and I'm actually going to, I'd like to start with this with a kind of bombastic statement that maybe with assessment optionality, we have an idea whose time has come. But there's something here that might be fundamentally useful to how we assess anyway, not just in political studies or political science, but across higher education in general. But it's an idea that really is an advent of the last few years in higher education. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw increasing interest in inclusive modes of learning and of assessment. But the pandemic really underlined the need for quick adoption of new ways of approaching things that really are part of the traditional architecture of how we assess at universities. So one will probably be very familiar, and that is the exam, right? The exam where we picture there might be some vague hints of content, but generally students are brought into a big hall. They all sit down together. The doors are shut. And then over the next 2 hours, they answer a paper. That is how I did my pre-university exams. I even did some exams at university along those lines. And of course, because of the realities of a airborne pandemic, it's no surprise that those realities had to quickly change. That architecture of assessment had to quickly change when COVID came about. And so with it, there was this drive of thinking how we want to assess, that we didn't just take a kind of snapshot, oh, we have to change because of these conditions. It also gave us, it was a critical juncture for us to consider how we learn, how we assess in our field. And therefore, that's my pitch about why I think that this is a moment to consider whether this is an idea whose time has come. So let's think about the context of this research project, about why I wanted to set out on exploring whether there was a subject specific case for employing assessment optionality in our lovely field of politics and international relations. Firstly, I think it's worth saying that for some of our students, assessment always isn't always the most exciting things, right? They look at deadlines with dread. They worry a lot to the point that actually interrupts their learning a lot of the time, or their passion for a subject about how they're going to be assessed, whether they're going to perform well, etc., etc. And so one of the big questions for me is how is it we can make assessment so it's a bit more engaging and, dare we say, even more enjoyable for our students. However, that dread around assessment isn't unique to the student experience, right? I think it's fair to say for colleagues as well that we can be learning for some time or engaging with learning for a long time and get used to the same routines. And I think I saw in assessment optionality the ability for us to change things, to shake things up. It's something I could see happening in other disciplines, and was excited to see if that's something we could pursue in politics and IR. Because even though it's not very exciting, we know assessment's really, really important, but it shouldn't just be something that's off-putting. That excitement is something that we should explore and pursue. So I'm excited about the prospects of this idea. But to be completely open and transparent on this, one of my big concerns in pursuing this was whether I was going to be able to sell the idea to colleagues. And I don't mean in the general, like very literally in the department. I was thinking about how are we going to make this pitch work. And it's not something that's going to be rare that colleagues in our field should feel this way. I've cited this paper from Ishiyama, Bruning, and Lopez from almost 2 decades ago now, a paper published in APSR entitled A Century of Continuity and Little Change, where they talk about the political science curriculum over the previous 100 years, and they remark on that there's quite a lot of consistency how we approach this field, i.e., this is a field that has a history of limited pedagogical innovation. And so one of the big things for me is that we therefore need potentially to consider the subject-specific case when we are employing innovations, to make sure there is actually a case to be made for changing our much-loved and long-established ways of doing things. So, into this comes the idea of assessment optionality. So traditionally, when we think of assessment, we think of students taking quite a passive role in this, i.e. the instructor decides, okay, or the educator, I should say, sorry, I'm trying to change my language here, says, okay, you have this essay due by this point, maybe you can choose between these questions. That's the idea. And this is a format we'll be well familiar with. As I say, we have our practices of how we've been assessed, but also how we assess. Assessment optionality is one that tries to put an approach to assessment that tries to put the student in a more active role, not just choosing potentially between essay topics, but choosing maybe between a whole host of choices in that assessment process. In fact, we can see in the literature on assessment optionality, which, by the way, I'm using uniformly here. It's not the only game in town when it comes to thinking about giving choice a chance. Sorry to reference the title. So some of the other labels I've found in the literature are flexible assessment, negotiated assessment, assessment empowerment, student choice in assessment. I'm sure there are a bunch of others. I'm using assessment optionality uniformly here because this comes from a quality assurance agency report, on a multi-institution report into assessment optionality that was published a few years ago, which for me really was the kicking off point for thinking about whether we could explore this in political studies, something that there wasn't any literature on yet. So in their literature, we see that there are 2 established forms of optionality. The first we can call the variance type. This is, but there is one mode of assessment, one format of assessment, but students get to choose maybe between like when they're deadlined, a sooner or a later deadline when they submit their work. They can choose potentially a variance in how long the work is. Do they want to write a shorter piece or a longer piece? Then the other is the format. Do you want to choose between a policy report or a video presentation, a podcast or an essay, right? This format mode is the second one. And we also see that there is a literature out there that says that there are some advantages in the round two assessment optionality. So, for example, improved student outcomes, improved student motivation and engagement, and improved inclusivity, i.e., there seems to be something here that students like in the literature, that they either find it easier to engage with, they find it more enjoyable. There's something there that seems to work, and there's evidence at an HE level to point to this being a successful mode of assessment. However, there's also shortcomings that are established in the literature. One is that when given too much choice, students can suffer from maybe what we could call analysis paralysis, right? They've got too many options. They just don't know where to go with this. We can also say that this isn't just a burden placed on students, that setting up loads of different options could be a burden on academics and on professional support staff in an institution as well. Too much admin might be a big issue. We know how much people have really worked in academia today, and so that might be an issue we want to be aware of as well. Nevertheless, looking at this literature, I thought, oh, there's something here I want to explore in political studies. And so that's why I want to present for the next portion of this little talk. So I was fortunate enough to receive funding from my university's Learning and Teaching Fund. This is a fund that's used to explore these kind of issues around inclusive education, especially using student partnership as a method. Now, I wasn't just into student partnership because it was going to help me get funding, although of course that's helpful, but also because I thought this was a really important way of approaching the scholarship of teaching and learning, a way of approaching how we understand and consider innovations. That students really are vital partners in pedagogical explorations, that we don't want to be totally top down in our approach. So in total, there were two roles for students in the project. First was the student partners. Student partners were brought in at an early stage to help co-design the research and co-deliver the research activities, and then student participants. The only role of a student participant was to participate in focus groups. In total, we had 3 focus groups, so 24 split slightly unevenly between those 3. Or maybe not, maybe it was 8 in each. Sorry, I'm doing really bad maths. That's the week 10 calling there. So in terms of the process, I did a call for student partners. In the call for student partners, I said, I'm not just after the familiar faces in the department. I think you must have this in your departments as well. Those people you see time and time again. We're after whoever's keen. And actually, as a kind of behind the scenes, how I did this is, if this is useful, I didn't want to do interviews for the role of student partners. There was a lot of interest in this. And so a practical thing that I actually found really useful and genuinely very productive was I made the decision on participation on 2 grounds. One was year group. So with 6 student partners, they were all undergrads. I wanted 2 from each year group to have a range of time studying politics and availability at particular time. I gave different options. And so for our first meeting, and that really became, it was very practical, but that became the main reason of selection. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. It really worked because it created a group of people that you wouldn't necessarily put together in the first place. And they were fantastic. They really gelled very quickly. We actually had a great team that were very keen, very behind the project. It's a lovely thing to come together with a group of people like that who at first they didn't know each other. And over the course of the project, you didn't get very close and also like very personally engaged in the project. I was thinking about this at the presentation. It'd be lovely to have a group picture or something as part of these slides. Unfortunately, I can't do that, and I can't pitch their names because of the ethics that we have around the scholarship of teaching and learning research at the University of York, which is a subject I'll get onto in a minute. Um, so I had a first workshop with student partners where we designed the project that followed. Then a call for participants. Then we did focus groups. We designed with the student partners the questions we would explore in the focus groups, the topics that we wanted to headline in our conversations in the focus groups. So in particular, the student partners who were leading the conversations, I was there to kind of take notes as the researcher and steer things back on track if they needed to be. 4 topics in total for the focus groups: assessment norms, essays, inclusivity, and optionality as that fourth. I'm trying to hold down my little finger there. As that fourth point of the conversation. So this wasn't an optionality-led conversation. It was first around the norms of assessment. Focus groups, and then again, we all came together with the student partners. We spent a lot of time co-exploring and then co-constructing the outcomes of the project. So I mentioned a note on ethics. 3 principles underpinned the project. First, all participation was voluntary. We had to headline the fact, or I had to headline the fact that no participation was linked to grades in any way. There is some variation in the scholarship of teaching and learning literature on this. Some scholars in America say, oh, it's very good to use grades to compensate participants for their time. That wouldn't work in the UK in our quality assurance landscape. I think that would cause enormous problems. So grades were not part of this equation at all. Everyone was paid for their participation at an hourly rate above the national living wage. And also this method, this student partnership and the focus group method, having student partners lead in the focus group conversations, was to underline this third principle of the ethics of this project about limiting concerns of being judged. There's a lot of evidence to say that students feel a lot better expressing their point of view when they are around other peers. There is a bit of a debate about the focus group and how that might influence work. And watch this space. It's something I want to explore with a colleague at the minute. I'm wondering about this a lot. But if you are interested in SOTL and research ethics, I'm going to do, as I've headlined here, a shameless self-promo alert. Me and a colleague, Rebecca Tapscott of the University of Glasgow, have just had a piece out in PS Political Science and Politics about this very question on SOTL research ethics in political studies, because we found actually there is a lot of exploration of this in other fields like psychology, education, music, for example, but to date there hadn't been any exploration of this in our field. So do give that a look if you want, for kind of maybe a kicking off point for this. So that was the process. In terms of the results, I want to start with this. It's a definition co-written with our student partners. We spent a really good part of an afternoon really going through this, thoroughly writing and rewriting this till they got to a point where all the student partners were really happy with this. And this is how they designed or understood or wanted normatively to assessment optionality to be understood. So I'll read this out. Assessment optionality is a practice wherein students, based on their personal preferences and needs, are provided with flexibility and control over the ways they are assessed. With optionality, students independently choose from a menu of possible assessment formats that cater to a diverse body of skills and needs. These formats include traditional and innovative styles of assessment, and guided by module conveners, reflect the module learning outcomes. So, very interestingly, if we think about the earlier options I highlighted from the general optionality literature, they differentiate between variance and format type. Uniformly, students rejected the variance type, i.e. you can submit a piece of work as long or as short as you'd like, and you can submit to a deadline that suits you. They felt that issues of fairness came into this in a major way, and issues of fairness are ones that come up time and again in any conversations around optionality. They were really focused on format and saw the benefits of optionality really squarely about offering different formats of assessment, but that was the best way to approach this, at least for students in our field. So the big question behind this project was, is there a subject-specific case for employing assessment optionality on courses in our field? And in total, drawing together the conversations we had in the focus groups and with student partners, we landed that the subject specific case um, boiled down to 4 headline points. Okay. First is authenticity. I've got a quote from each and then I'll expand. So a student said in one of the focus groups, politics manifests itself in many ways, both academically and professionally. And so it should be assessed in a way that reflects that. I.e., students were keenly aware that people were approaching the field of politics in a whole range of different ways. That this was an interdisciplinary field. Some people want to approach it very concretely as an academic field of study. Some are really, for example, policy driven. This is going to be useful for an example I'm setting up to talk about it later. So it was authentic to offer different approaches to assessment. This translates well to the second point, which is about employability. Here, a quote I have is, students of politics will go on to a diverse range of careers. Being able to tailor your degree to cater for these diverse skill sets would therefore be especially beneficial. I.e., students might want to demonstrate their identity in that different way. So might want to say, well, actually, I am very good at public speaking. I know this role involves a lot of public speaking. I chose during my degree to do assessments on public speaking to develop my skills here, right? So they have a moment of choice to help talk about their skill development. Again, this relates to this third point on agency. The choice quote I have here. I like the idea that it lets you learn more about yourself in the process. You have to consider what your strengths are. So one of the things I gave the student partners before we set about the project was the subject benchmark statement for politics and international relations. The reason I gave them this is I thought it was really useful for them to think about studying politics beyond their own experiences at York. York is a Russell Group institution that, it's in a very safe city or has a reputation for being very safe. We could say that it's not a universal student experience. And so I wanted to give them that opportunity to think about how different students might approach or conceptualize the field. And something they really got from reading the subject benchmark statement was that idea of agency. It's something they talked about a lot, but that's key to being a politics student. And so they felt that was also part of optionality, but the benefit is that they get to practice very, very clearly to them their agency. And then finally, and unsurprisingly, the issue of inclusivity came up. Given that, again, as the subject benchmark statement well says, there's a big part of politics that pays attention to issues of social justice and inequality. It won't surprise you to learn that students were very excited about any innovation that would improve inclusivity. And so, as one student said, we shouldn't push people to a certain way of being assessed when we know that there are different styles of learner. Now, the styles of learner literature, I appreciate, is a bit questionable, but clearly this matters to students' perceptions, right? But there are different approaches and different ways of learning, and that this might offer something that is more inclusive. So that was, according to this research, the subject-specific case for employing assessment optionality. And then the next part of the project was thinking about, well, how do we do this? If we want to do this, how do we do this? And in total, 4 recommendations were produced from this research. So first off is be module specific, i.e. don't do optionality for the sake of having options, i.e. don't just have a few options because you think it's good. There needs to be a logic, a module specific logic about why these options are selected. So the example I'm going to talk about in a bit is my second year European Union politics module. If I had said, we're going to have the essay and a nice tap dance, those are the 2 choices, you could probably say, well, it's not really module specific. I don't see the benefit, depending on your interpretation of European Union politics, of course. The second is be clear and consistent, right? That maybe this is a step into the unknown for students, and they need to be, well, this gets on to the third point, they need to be supported through that, but also that you need to have clear rubrics to support this. And so you might need to have differentiated support for your different options. Kind of already started talking about the third, be supportive, that, do know that this is a new step for students And it might be that you need to have some additional guidance on why you need to make a choice and why this is important. This is something that I've just baked into my lectures now, but it's a nice kind of learning through practice thing I've done there. And then finally, be varied. This is a bit vague, but what I mean here is that students felt that there should be a difference between the assessment formats. That ideally, of those menu of options, there should be a difference between a traditional style of assessment, i.e., the essay or exam, and then something a bit more innovative, a bit more out there, and importantly, in Be Varied, not too many as well, but you might not want to have too extensive a list, and so those options should be varied enough to express some of the range of why this is useful. So I've kind of started talking about this a bit, but to give an example, I have a stage 2 undergraduate module called European Union, Politics and Policy. As the name implies, there's two big parts of this module. We spend the first part of the semester talking about the institutions, the history, the theories of integration, and in the second part of the semester, we spend time talking about the policy areas of the European Union. And obviously, there's a lot of integration here between the two. Formally, this was assessed through an exam. When COVID strikes, this is moved to an open exam immediately, but we're thinking that this change needs to be made to make this, I don't want to say more fun. Obviously, it's the European Union politics. It's already fun. But to give this kind of new engagement about why this is important. So I changed it from an open exam to an essay or a policy report and critical feedback. The thinking on the module was that over the years, even with Brexit, there are a lot of students that approach the subject as a field they want to work in the Brussels bubble, maybe, or just in policy in some way. They're really exercised about these policy questions. But some others also approach it because they are interested in EU studies as a field of academic study. So these are the two options. That's the logic behind. We have run optionality for 1 year now on this module. I just have come from one of my last seminars for the EU politics module this semester. So we're about to run the optionalized, if that's a word, assessment one more time this year for the second time. And so we've got some early results. In no way am I saying these results are indicative. I'm just sharing openly like what we have so far. So firstly, I'd heard as a rule of thumb that probably about 10% of students would do the out there option, i.e. 90% would go for the essay. Actually, in this first run, it was 17% went for the policy report and critical reflection. Also, the other thing is, I won't get into the specifics on the recording, but we saw stronger results from the policy report and critical reflection. I can speculate as to why, right? That the students who felt confident in doing the out there option are those that were already receiving better marks and were willing to take what might by others be perceived as a risk. Interestingly, with 1 year of running assessment optionality, and we can't prove cause and effect here, but interestingly, student numbers on the module have doubled. It's gone from 30 to 60 students, which is massive. I mean, again, who can blame them? It's the European Union. It's interesting stuff, but it's nice to see there's some engagement with it. So that's the project. That's the pitch, and that's how I've actioned it in the department. I just thought I'd share a few words about the dissemination of it, because I know certainly I find it interesting when other people that do SOTL talk about this, so I hope it's relevant to you as well. I did some internal dissemination and some external dissemination. So in the department, I presented this project and my results to our department teaching committee, our board of studies, and other departments have other colleagues in the department have adopted optionality, and it's been adopted as a recommendation for assessment for all non-core modules, i.e. core modules we've kept as having a set assessment so we know that students are being assessed in some ways throughout their degree, i.e. so we can expect some skills, right? Or some, not some skills, they're all very skilled, but some specific skills as they go through the degree. It's something also that I've presented at the university and faculty levels, and we're seeing uptake in other areas of university, which is nice. I published this as a paper in PS Political Science and Politics. The paper is called Student Choice in Assessment. Is there a subject-specific case for using assessment optionality in political science education? Oh, I should have made that shorter. I'm sorry. And also, I've shared quite a few things on the Active Learning Political Science blog about not just the practice, but also the research process itself on staff-student partnership and how I found that process. So I just wanted to share a bit about that, about the process. Um, I think I'll leave it there in terms of me meandering through this subject.